Hey, and welcome to the Growing Leaders Podcast. This podcast exists because the topic of growing next generation leaders is very important. Hi, Jamie.
Christine.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I really appreciate you welcoming me.
Today, we're talking about the key ingredients to missional churches.
We're going to talk about it, or you've already been talking about it with somebody?
No, we will be
so
talking.
I'm not late.
You're not late to the conversation.
Oh, great.
Hopefully.
That's great. You said to be here at 2.
Well, it's 1:33,
okay.
so you're a little
All right.
early to the conversation.
Right. Keep going. I get you.
We have a special guest that we have known. We met several years ago. He is a key leader here in the Metro Atlanta area, an elder at Perimeter Church, and it's going to bring some unique insight. But what do you have to say?
Yeah, so this is Chip Sweney. Chip wrote a book a few years ago called A Different Kind of Big, and really was basically a middle school or a youth leader, and started to involve young people in making a difference in their city. But then that led to starting to engage other churches across the city. And then Perimeter Church, which is an incredibly strategic church, just an amazing church. You can get a lot of stuff online from their church, and they've just done a great job in Atlanta. Everybody knows them. In fact, we travel across the U.S. and we'll find their impact. I was in D.C. the other day. They were mentioning them in Washington, D.C. The U.S. government was. I was in Baltimore a while ago. They were mentioning them. I was in Boston. They were mentioning them. So they were great, but they started a thing called Unite, where they started finding missional churches across the city and kind of drawing them together into a community of practice. And we got to participate in that. So Chip is just, first of all, he's about the nicest person I've ever met, but he's also incredibly persistent about the gospel of the kingdom. And with him, it's not this pressurized thing. It's just like a nose for the ball, and he just kind of goes for it. So, but what's great about having him is that brings you to, I think we have a chance to touch today as we talk to him. The question I've heard him asking a lot lately, in fact, I think he's even doing some graduate work on this, which is, what are the key ingredients to missional churches? And the idea of that being, a lot of people use the word missional. Back in around 92 or so, there was a book about missional churches that Daryl Guter and a lot of others participated in, Alan Roxburgh. And it kind of started this conversation about churches recovering the sense that they are missionary outposts, and also kind of participating in some of the stuff guys like Leslie Newbegin had talked about how do you have a missionary encounter in the West? How do people who are back here in Western Europe or the United States, how do we turn and engage our culture? And so, man, there are a million books on missional churches. There's conferences and everything. Sadly, it hasn't necessarily participated in missional activity growing, but it's participated in a lot of people talking. So you almost have some people who are tired of the conversation, which I think would be the enemy winning like crazy. I think the thing that we're talking about today, and I think that Chip cares so much about and has found answers to, is how not to talk about it, but how to be missional.
How to be it. Yeah, I think it's, I don't want to string this along for too long because we want to go ahead and jump into the conversation with Chip, but it is, you hear a lot about missional churches being missional, living missionally, but this conversation is to not just talk about it, but to figure out how do we get it, how do we do it, and how do we get it. And so our hope is at the end of this conversation is you have some of the tools you need, and then we'd love to engage the conversation with you further too.
Yeah, and this is why you don't want to just talk about it and you want to live it. It's because it's awesome. It's because the life of God, the Zoe, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. That's the Greek word Zoe. When Jesus is being Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me. He's setting captives free, and he's transforming lives. And so getting to live in that as a believer is what it's all about. And if you miss that, you miss Jesus. And so first of all, the next generation, if you're talking about raising leaders or growing leaders, they care so much about this. But all of us, honestly, unless maybe you've shut something off in your heart, but wake it back up again, because this is the stuff we all care about. So the reason you wouldn't want to just get caught up in the words is the enemy will trick you into talking yourself to death just to keep you from the greatest thing in the world. If you had next to you the most delicious food or a potion that would make you live forever, and you talked about it for so long that it emptied out and you never got to drink it, or you talked about it so long that it spoiled and you never got to eat it, you'd feel like you wasted it. And so excited to get into this conversation today.
Yeah, let's get to it. All right. Well, here we are back today with Chip Sweney, who is a good friend of ours here in the Metro Atlanta area. I'm going to butcher this because I only know this through Jamie, but it's my understanding you are getting your doctorate or your PhD, and you're studying missional churches?
Our master's. I said you were working on graduate work.
Graduate work. Sorry. I totally, I told you I was going to not get it right.
Actually, I am working on a doctorate.
Wow, you did it.
So, yes, I am working on a doctorate. And yes, with really trying to understand what does it look like for us, for believers to be sent, right? The Father sent the Son, and the Son sends us. And what does that look like? Who are people that are living that way? And even a little bit about what are some of the common maybe factors or ingredients of people that live that way is where I want to try and get to. That's a part of it, at least.
That makes a perfect podcast for you. Yeah.
It's like we queued it up for you.
Well, I have a good first shot across the bow of these questions, but you and I have talked about this too, but I'd love to hear you talk about this. So if you're talking about how do you build a missional church, I guess the question is, are you saying how do you build a church whose corporate structure and staff are leading the church into big missional impact? And I think there's a lot about that that's awesome. But then there's another way to say, are you a missional church where every single one of the people in your church are living missionally? And I don't know that I think it would be really wrong to play one of those against the other, but I guess as you think about which is it or is it both, like what do you think about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a both and.
Yeah.
I will say ultimately the church is the people. And I think that we need to look at the granular level, the grassroots level. And so I think, what is it? How are people living? How do we want them to live? How do we come alongside them, encourage them, equip them, walk with them? And we together are the body of Christ, right? 1 Corinthians 12 talks about the body and its many parts. Yeah. And so we are many parts of an overall body. You can look at our church, Perimeter Church, as one body, but we're, even as Perimeter Church, we're one small part of a much bigger body. But I do think ultimately we want to get down to people's lives, families' lives. Yeah. At the same time, I think it's important at the structural level. What are we designing? How are we casting vision? How are we teaching and equipping our folks to be able to live that way? So I think both components are important.
And I think starting with some of the things you guys have accomplished, and then I'm going to turn and ask you yet still some of where do you find the challenges, but some of the things you guys have accomplished, like you guys as a church, you were meeting in, kind of different locations, but then you guys got that property and all of a sudden your church just grew in such size. And you guys are now a church of about how many congregants would you say?
Yeah, we have about 4,600 members, and then, several thousand more that would say they're part of Perimeter Church, but aren't necessarily members.
Yeah, so you guys, that's extraordinary. It's a great story. You guys have published a lot. You guys have participated in the conversation across the country about life-on-life discipleship. There's a lot that you've been involved with. You've been involved in missionally impacting the nations, and that's been a good part of your life. You guys started Camp All-America, right? All-American. Which is right for kids in the neighborhood. How many kids come to that camp each year, Chip?
Yeah, right now it would be in the 6,000 to 7,000 kids a summer, and I would say that that's one of by far the best outreaches we have, and that majority of the people, the kids and families that are part of that, are non-churched.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been an amazing ministry to kids in the community, but I'll say it's been an incredible leadership development engine of college students.
Yes.
In fact, really, our staff sees it as a way to really equip and build into college students so that they are developing in their walk with him and are becoming more missional.
And it's such a perfect outreach, because when you talk about loving your neighbor, what you guys are doing is you have a very beautiful, property, which is big enough to do a camp on, and then it's positioned right in the middle of a residential area where there's a lot of people. If you're going to throw a rock, if you had a really good arm, if you're going to throw a rock, there's already thousands and thousands of people that are just right there. And so then to be able to just come right down and get to do a camp where you guys are on that property, but then on top of that, you guys do everything very well. You're very organized, and so families feel very safe. So you're able to serve them. But then talk about loving your neighbor. You're helping families who are concerned about what will happen with their kids in the summer. But then you're also having a chance to connect with young people and place them in leadership roles. And so that's the kind of stuff you guys do. But there's another thing, because that one in itself, if that's all you did, that would be great. But there's another part of where you guys have also launched, I know it's more than 10, but it's like 15 nonprofits from within your midst. What's the actual number? Because I think I misquote that.
Oh, I don't actually know, Jamie. I mean, I don't think it's interesting so 21 years ago, or back up a minute. So the church is about 46 years old, planted by Randy Pope and a team of folks. But the first 25 years, the interesting part is that while we were doing some great things globally, we did not have a strategic intentionality really missionally around us. And really had to confess and repent as a church leadership. That was 2002, year 25. And I remember there was a book that was really instrumental for us called The Churches of Irresistible Influence by Robert Lewis. Yeah, and he asked a question that I still think today is a great question for all churches. And that is, if your church was gone tomorrow, would the community notice or care? Wow. I think that's still a great question. And we had to be honest that while we were considered a very successful church, we were evangelistic, gospel, but quite frankly, while our people would have missed us, our community would not have missed us that much. And at that point, the way we say it now, this comes from Jonathan Edwards, but a healthy church is a three-stranded church, meaning head, heart, and hand. Head meaning strong doctrinally, heart being gospel-centered, evangelical. But the hand is what was missing for us. The hand is loving your neighbor, mercy and justice initiatives, and that's what we didn't have. And so honestly, we've been on a journey these last 21 years of really incorporating the hand so that we can be a healthier church of head, heart, and hand. But when we launched community outreach 21 years ago, we decided that we weren't going to just start a lot of new ministries, that we were going to partner with some really great nonprofits like Boy with a Ball. I don't think it goes quite that far back with Boy with a Ball, but true. We identified key nonprofits who were doing a great job, and we wanted to come alongside them to be able to really help what they're doing and then connect our people to it. Now, what's happened over the years, there have been some gaps that Perimeter people have identified and have started nonprofits because of that. But it wasn't a strategic, and there wasn't a strategic desire to necessarily just start a lot. But we have had quite a few people at Perimeter who've started nonprofits.
Yeah, and as you said, you've got the community outreach department, but that group kind of functions as its own agency that's very unique in understanding what's happening. And then you also have kingdom investments, which is it's like a foundation that's philanthropically investing in things. So those are just big pieces. If you're a nonprofit like us or groups like us in the city, you know that you guys are a partner that is a critical partner and a very helpful partner. But I think you mentioned one of the ingredients that we can pop up right there already. The previous podcast that we recorded for last month, we were talking about when you're evangelizing or even when you're just loving or ministering or caring for somebody next to you, you've got to be okay with following the leading of the Holy Spirit to just care and love, understanding you may not see visible fruit in that moment. You've got to be okay with just loving, without something dramatic happening that makes you feel like it was all worth it. You just love without expecting something back. So that is on an individual level, but what you just said, or what you're talking about, is on a corporate level where you guys somehow made a decision that you were going to be involved in caring for things or investing in things that weren't necessarily directly benefiting your people. Your people were participating in it, but you were okay with benefiting a neighborhood or a group of people, or investing in a nonprofit that was investing in a group of people that wouldn't end up in your church. And I think that's a little bit mind-blowing for some churches that feel like their resources are limited. So I think that's an ingredient, but how did you guys come to that? Or was it just a natural piece for you?
Yeah, I think you have to go back really to Randy's vision in starting the church, and even the name of the church, actually. So when Randy and the team birthed the church, the desire was not to build a big church. The desire was to see Atlanta come into a life-transforming encounter with the kingdom. And I think that has driven us from day one, is that we want to see kingdom impact. We want to see the gospel spread in word and deed, and lives change, and spiritual multiplication. And so and honestly, Jamie, it's indicative of even our role, Perimeter's role in a movement like Unite, for example, that is about bringing the churches together in the city. Well, that doesn't benefit Perimeter Church necessarily, but hopefully it benefits Atlanta for the kingdom. And I think, again, because of Randy's initial vision and how that really bleeds throughout us, is we want to come alongside others and help make kingdom impact.
Yeah, so I think I said that you guys are benefiting people without regard to whether or not it comes back into your congregation. I think you would say that this is not a separate ingredient.
Yeah.
It's the same one, but it is that you're kingdom focused instead of just church focused. And
Correct.
I think that is really beautiful. There's another one though I think this is an ingredient that we should notice and I noticed this about you today over the last few years of your church. You've ended up in a role where you're serving a lot of people and you have a lot of responsibility. But if anybody encounters you, Chip, and I'm not going to try to embarrass you, the feeling is that you have some margin. Like the feeling always of talking with you is if we say to you, hey, Chip, could you be on this podcast? Or hey, Chip, we need to talk to you. Or you'll even reach out to us about an initiative in the town of Duluth that you're interested in. That's unusual for many churches, because in many churches, like, hey, how you doing, brother? It's like, oh, I'm just so busy. We're trying to get it. But somehow I think an ingredient that you have that breeds this, and I think it helps also for any church, is being able to find margin and bandwidth to not be functioning out of a scarcity kind of mindset, but functioning out of a sense of surplus or God's blessing. Would you agree with that? And then how do you experience that personally?
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that.
Yes.
I think for me, and I think for many of us, it's wanting to live the life, live the kingdom life, walk the talk. And so I want to be doing and living the way I want the people of our church. I want to be an example, or just to be part of the team. And so, I personally, for example, this is one example, but my wife and I, Leanne and I, have lived in Duluth for 21 years. Our kids went up through the public schools there. So we still have a real heart for the people of Duluth and for impact there. And so I see that, God placed us here 21 years ago in terms of Duluth as a family. And so I want to use how he's wired me and gifted me to be able to love people, be able to connect people together, convene folks, and do things like that. And I just see it as part of, this is the way God's wired me. And so I want to be able to use it for his glory and for the kingdom.
And you bring up a point that allows us to segue a little bit, because that's about your own personal response in the middle of it, which we talked about. There's the corporate response we've just talked about, a lot of the great impact that Perimeter's been able to make. But now as you're turning to the question of like, what is it for you as a leader, and what are some of the things that you've watched that maybe are challenges that you've faced about motivating, as much of the congregation or as many of the people that make up the church as possible to turn into those missionary encounters and to turn into kind of seeing the grace of God flowing into the ordinary spaces and the ordinary places of their lives? You mentioned it for you guys, encountering that in Duluth, but what are some of the challenges for you as a leadership team as you guys are kind of pushing your people to do the same?
Yeah, I think the reality is that we live in a very busy culture. North Atlanta, and which is the case in many places, is people's lives are extremely busy. People feel overwhelmed and a lot of times are pulled in a lot of different directions. And so I think for all of us, and is a matter of what are our priorities and how do we take initiative maybe in some things that are more about the kingdom than they are about ourselves. I think for us at Perimeter, a couple things. One is, again, the big kingdom vision that really has been there from the beginning. I think that, Jeff is our new senior pastor. While his terminology may be a little bit different, again, he continues to cast a big kingdom vision for us as a church. And then our spiritual formation and leadership development process has been this life-on-life missional discipleship. It really is the way that people connect primarily with each other, the way they grow together, and even the way that we're spurred on to be missional. I think by far that priority and the depth that happens in relationships and the accountability that happens among each of us in our own lives, in the struggle areas of our lives, and to be missional, the accountability to be missional that's part of that, that by far has made the biggest difference, I feel like, at Perimeter. And I've now had the privilege to be on staff here 27 years. And I came to Christ in the business world. And Leanne and I started going to Perimeter within just a few years after becoming believers. And so we've really grown up spiritually here in many ways. But I think, again, the preaching of the word is mandatory, is extremely important. Beyond that, though, is how are we really discipling our people? How are we making disciples? We call it making disciples and training disciples. And that happens as a band of folks who come together, who really live life, get in each other's business.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to you, Christine, for you to start with your questions as well. But I will say that I think that's another ingredient that we have found in our experiences parallels what you're talking about, which is outreach and community engagement and missional engagement being paired with discipleship. And for us, we're blessed to have gotten to stumble into a model that we've developed over time in the United States in difficult neighborhoods, but then also in Latin America, now across the world, and now refugee camps. And it's called Love Your City, and we've seen entire slums rise out of poverty, but we actually didn't go at it. We've presented it at the World Bank. It's been funded by the State Department, all that stuff, but we didn't go at it actually thinking, how do you change neighborhoods? So we went at it where we were working with young people and trying to see them grow spiritually. And we realized that if you just sat them in an auditorium-like setting and talked to them about the gospel, faith is such an action verb. It's hard to develop faith when somebody's just sitting, in a chair. So we realized, okay, well, they need a coach. They need somebody who's a little further ahead who can model this and invite them into their life and see them live it. But then we found if you just gave them a coach, it became so much about them because it's how you doing? How's your life? So we added, a team, a group of other people that are catalytic in each other's lives and kind of provoking each other onto good works. And that really, really worked for a while. One guy would think he's doing great, but a girl shows up and says, this weekend, I had all this happen, and it would push them back out into like, I could do better. But we still found that hit a roadblock of becoming a comfort zone. They could kind of cling to each other after a little while. So we added the third piece of beyond a coach, beyond a team, a playing field of a place where they had to go put it into practice. And we just found the best way to develop a lot of faith is to find the most difficult neighborhood in your city, the thing everybody's concerned about, or the school that the mayor's concerned about, and walk in, and there you're going to have to learn how to depend on the Lord. And discipleship becomes more critical because you've got a mission now. And we just found that in mission, people need discipleship more because they're facing God-sized challenges. So I think that's another key ingredient. But Christine, what are you thinking?
Well, I think this is going to be a two-parter because we're already actually almost at time. But I didn't even realize it because it's been so good. So I have two questions for you. You can answer them in whatever order you want or together, but I'll ask them together. One, we've said a few things, but like loving and caring for others that don't directly impact you or your church, more of a kingdom focus for church focus. One of the things we've said, Jamie paraphrased it, but it's really finding margin and purpose. Like where are the places you're called to? That's where there's some more margins. Like you've really pushed into the places where the Lord has you, like the city you live in. And so you have a vested interest. So it's slightly easier for you to have faith for the things and the possibilities. Discipleship, there's all these things. But what are some of the other missing pieces you think it would take for a church? And so this is the second part of the question. What would you say to a pastor listening to this or a missional leader listening to this? It's like, I'm leading this group. I want us to not just talk about being missional, but to actually be missional. What are some of the things you would say to that listener, that person?
Yeah, that's good. One is, I think it's really important for pastors, and I would say missions pastors too, is to build relationship with some other pastors that are around you. Again, I think this whole team concept of feeling like you're part of something bigger. You've got some others that are doing it, and so you can begin to learn and leverage from them. I think many times pastors do feel alone, or maybe don't feel like they have the bandwidth or the margin, so to speak, like you say. But I think when you begin to get around others, you see that it's not all up to you, or it's not all up to your church. And you can begin to connect with others, and you can even leverage some things that another church may be doing, and you can be part of that. You could either join it, or you could put your own maybe flavor to it and do it as well in your context. So I think that's a really, really important part. And then the second thing I would say is, I think for me, I really appreciated going all the way back to when I was first a believer and maybe even going to seminary. And the emphasis was on make your priority your personal walk with the Lord and your time with Him. And begin, don't let just your prep for a sermon take up your personal time with the Lord, but really have that time to listen, to dwell with, to abide with Him, and let Him begin to shape our hearts in such a way that He begins to give us some passions and some things that we sense maybe to really go after. But that needs to come from Him. and not just generated by us.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to the results of your graduate project, your work, and excited to get to help you in every way. But just want to commend, first of all, your church. If anybody's in Atlanta, Perimeter Church is just a great church. We've been so excited to know them. We talk about you guys all over the place. But then also just excited to be your friendship. We'll have to have you on next time to talk about the story of Duluth. There's a wild story that Chip is participating in that next time maybe we'll capture.
Thank you, guys. I have a ton of respect and appreciate you so much. And I learn a lot from you guys. So very thankful for that, but even more so for the friendship.
And we're back. Hey, Christine. So
Hi.
we were talking to Chip, and you really, at the very end, you got to ask some questions, but we kind of ran out our clock, so I'll have to have him back on. But okay, what were some of the things that impacted you in talking to Pastor Sweney?
Man, there's so many. I have so many notes from this one. I'm going to just say some of like the highlight reels for me. One, something you said, actually, faith is an active verb. I think we just need to put that in our pockets and save that for later. One, just because, like, as believers, we end up in sometimes very passive situations where it's like, I was talking to actually some leaders yesterday, and they were like praying for breakthrough. And it was like they needed more people to show up to something, but they weren't doing anything about it. And it was like, it's a very passive response. Like, you keep praying for Lord to do something, but actually what they need to do was go step out and see where he is and not just like wait for people to show up at their door. I think oftentimes as believers, we end up in very passive situations, and that's not what we're called to. So I just think that's an interesting thing to table for later. But I really love his kind of background of Perimeter, giving some of the history, which I didn't know. But the looking to, from the beginning, their focus was to see the city to be transformed and encounter Jesus. I don't know. There's something about like your core purpose. Is it to gather believers, or is it to see transformation in a city? I think even like your focus, like from the beginning, is different. Is it to build your church, or is it to build the church? Those are very different modus operandi. And I think that isn't something that was necessarily mentioned, but I think is a missing ingredient. Like, we do have 4 things that we kind of talked about, but I think a missing ingredient is that, are you building your church? Is it after filling your seats, or is it after making disciples that would go and do something? Because you could be, if you're launching a movement, it's not going to be people just hanging out at your house all the time or that are in your building. They're out doing something else for the kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you said we're going to do it later, but this whole idea of faith, which is kind of a Greek word, it's like pistua or pistis, but it is an action verb. Like I am faithing or trusting in this chair. I'm putting all my weight on it, and you really can't grow in faith. Like faith, faith is a response to God communicating something. God communicates who he is. God communicates something he's saying. And if you believe it, you'll step out on it. If you read your weather app that it's raining outside, and then you're probably going to grab an umbrella and still, like, you might not. You might just run to the car, but you're going to get wet, But faith is where you take seriously and you respond to something. And so it is an action verb, and it does grow. You don't need a lot of it. Even faith as small as a mustard seed. But the problem these days where church is just getting destroyed is not necessarily because of postmodernism or postmodern culture. It's really just because we've lost this reality where we're bringing in content, and our thought of faith is mental assent to a group of doctrines or orthodoxy. And we're looking at, can we say yes, yes, yes to all these lines? Which, by the way, for the next generation, they can parrot and mimic your lines immediately, but it doesn't mean you've gotten anywhere. Versus what we call orthopraxy, which is where not only are you parroting the words, but it's changing your life into your behaviors and actions, because discipleship touches behaviors above all, and it has to touch behaviors. disciplines your behavior. So Jesus is doing that with a group of guys. He's not just lecturing, but he's pulling them into things. And he's getting mad at them. And he's mad at them most of the time for being of little faith. So this whole point, you're really, really right. It's a really, really big deal. And I would actually say this. The reason to want to be a missional church is it is the best way to develop faith in believers. Like there's other ways. Of course, faith for finances, faith for your children, faith for your marriage, of course. But there's something really remarkable about leading your family out into caring for people through agape love. So I love that part. I think it's really, really important because I think that's at the root of the ingredients we heard today, that kingdom focus, that the kingdom doesn't revolve around the church learns to revolve around the kingdom. And so God cares about what's happening across the city, not just your church. And to your point, it is very worldly. It is like every business in the world to just be concerned about whether people are buying tickets to your show. So that power brokering, that quest for market share, that kind of stuff, you don't even have to be a believer to be motivated by those things. And so many churches, they don't show themselves to have the Spirit of God in them, but they don't show that kind of self-sacrificial love and things like that. And so faith is the missing piece there. So faith would lead you to a kingdom focus. The ability to have margin or bandwidth, you call so many of your friends and they're like, I'm just so busy. That is a lack of faith because God's given us everything that we need that pertains to life and godliness. And then discipleship, again, is a faith-forming process where you start to, that was his third ingredient, was discipleship, where it's changing people's priorities and motivating them to take action, to be intentional. And then finally, I love the fourth one of where he's talking about making your personal relationship with God to be your priority. And I really think that's what we're talking about. That's about growing in faith, learning to trust him, taking up your cross, denying yourself and following him and trusting him in your marriage and in your children. And that as a foundation for missional impact is what makes it really, really powerful. So yeah, amen, sister.
I don't even know that I should say this, but Pete and I lead a small group, and it was like week after week, everyone was just like talking about how busy they are, and everyone's so sad. And so everyone came back one week and we're like, how's everyone doing? But we're going to play a game. You have to tell us how you're doing when you're facing without saying the word busy one time. And everyone was like, ha. But yeah, we get trapped in saying that we're busy, which is kind of like a cop-out. Partially because it ends up, a lot of times it's things that happen to us or things that we choose in faithless moments. And so, I don't know why I said that, but I think we get trapped in that. And so I think there's a way, when you're looking for missional impact or being missional, or if you are yourself are leading a ministry and you're trying to figure out like what to change, don't get trapped in the busyness of it, because those are just like things that are happening to you or things you probably shouldn't be doing.
Well, and at the very base of everything for all of us is I'm going to probably die if I don't encounter him myself. I need him. Like, I'm so glad I don't go to his fan club, but I go to him. And so when we're talking about all this stuff, why faith would be important, it's because you yourself, if you're a leader or whoever you are that's listening to this, your own heart is going through storms in life and you need him. And honestly, if you find him, then he'll go through you to get a hold of other people finding him. It's just the way it goes. So I think that's really, really great. With Boy the Ball, we take this stuff seriously, not to push a bunch of people out to reach the lost. In all truth, we're all a little bit lost. Like we're all trying to get closer and closer to him, But we do this because these are the things that we found really help all of us grow in our relationship with him. So we have a summer camp that happens in June that's called Camp Overcomers. It's actually to draw young people not just to a mountaintop experience, but it's actually to draw them in Atlanta, in the city, into missional impact, alongside the power of the Holy Spirit transforming their lives at nights. And they're on teams, and they're doing fun stuff, and there's free time and all that kind of stuff. But I would so strongly, if you're somebody who you've got kids and you want them to know these kind of things, or you're a young person yourself, or you're a youth pastor or you're a church, please, we really, really would love to have you. And I can honestly guarantee you, by the grace of God, that it will change you. What are those dates?
June 16th through 21st.
Yeah, but go ahead and contact us now at info@boywiththeball.com just so we can start the conversation, because, it always takes a lot to get a church to make those kind of decisions, but let's get going on that. The other thing is we do Love Your City trips where we can take you and actually go, and you can either go as a family, you could see if there's an ability to sign on with a trip if you're an individual. We could look at that. Sometimes that happens. Or you could go as a business or a youth group or a
small group,
college group. Yeah, small group. So contact us there. That's where we actually talk about like the Forgotten Pieces book. Then we go participate in either Costa Rica or it could be Nicaragua or any of the countries we work in, where whatever country fits you best, where we can go and you're touching a team that's living out these things there. And there's just huge breakthrough that happens in you as you come back to live these things out here. And then finally, again, we've said this in a lot of the podcasts, but that Love Your City conference is such a great conference. Chip shared at last year's conference, and it was wonderful. But it's an opportunity for leaders from across the world, business leaders, individuals, young people to come and just kind of share. And it's from May 30th to June 1st. The theme this year is creativity. But please get in on these kind of things. And then also, please, in the comments below and stuff like this, share your thoughts, share your concerns, and we will go ahead and address your concerns on the air, because all of us, we're kind of hurting and we have to grow in these things for our own hearts above all.